Okay, welcome. This is part one of Athens and Sparta. Some overriding questions to be aware of that you should be able to answer at the end of these next two videos. This being part one. Compare and contrast Athens and Sparta. Geography, their society, their economics, and their military. How they develop and why. Once again, you can't just say who lives in Greece and say Greeks. Why do they need each other? Oftentimes, in this region, during this time period, Athens and Sparta are bitter rivals. Why did they need each other, however? So think about that question as we move forward, and we even later on when we start talking about the Persian Wars more closely. Which is the more important city-state in the development of Western civilization, Athens or Sparta? And how are tyrannical reformers champions of the Athenian people? They aren't always, but that's how they end up being remembered, at least some of them. Typically when we view tyrants, we don't think of them as reformers or champions of the common man. We think of them as terrible people that, overwork and enslave the population. We don't really see that in Athens. We start to see more and more reformers become military tyrants that end up giving power to the people and taking it away from the established, rich, wealthy, landowning aristocracy. First slide here, we have a basic rundown and comparison of Athens versus Sparta. If you look at even their mythology, it's different. The patron god of Athens is Athena, of course, the goddess of wisdom. In the Parthenon, located at the Acropolis, you had a large statue of Athena within it. Sparta, if you know anything about Sparta, you know they are a very military-driven society, and that's really what we're going to see here when we compare Athens versus Sparta. Sparta is very geared towards military. It is a military society. It makes sense that their patron god is Ares, the god of war. Now, as Sparta expands territorially in the south of Greece, in the Peloponnesus, it leads to a large slave population. This large slave population is known as the Helots. Now, the Helots are very important, and please make a note of it. They are the agricultural backbone of Sparta. They are the ones doing most of the labor. Very few rights for Helots. It was an established segment of society, and it was really the largest segment of society. I think pretty much for every one Spartan, there were about 7 Helots, which is typical of a lot of these city-states in Greece at the time. These large slave populations. As Athens territorially expanded throughout the Aegean Sea, they set up a series of trade networks. That's what they're there for. More cultural diffusion is going to occur in Athens. Sparta is more of a land-based, stay-at-home agricultural society. Athens more of a cosmopolitan. Many different cultures meshing together. Now, importance of service, when we say importance of service, I'm referring to government. It becomes very important for the typical Athenian citizen to participate in this democratic process. We will eventually see a democracy evolve in Athens where people were chosen to serve, and they were chosen by lot. And what I mean by chosen by lot is it could be anybody. You could end up being a representative. You didn't have to meet qualifications. I mean, there were some basics. You had to be an adult male citizen. Women, of course, could not participate, but there were no, wealth or territory requirements. Now, importance of service to the government was, like I said before, in Sparta, geared towards military. If you've ever seen the movie 300, that opening scene, I mean, it's highly stylized and everything, but it's actually very close and accurate to how Sparta actually was. When you were born, you were inspected. If they felt you were sickly or underweight or wouldn't survive, then you would be discarded. You would be placed out in the woods, basically to yourself. Parents had no say in it in this inspection. It was entirely up to the elders. At age 7, all males are taken from their homes and military training begins at age 7. At this training, you are encouraged to lie, to cheat, to steal, and you are trained to eventually fight and kill. Now, the twist here is, even though you're encouraged to lie and cheat and steal, and all these things. If you were caught by somebody, then you would get in trouble for it. And what they were trying to teach these young boys was how to be stealth-like, how to get away with stealing, how to get away with cheating and lying, how to get away with murder. The rite of passage for a Spartan male, for when a boy became a man in Spartan society, it wasn't going to the prom, it wasn't graduating high school or getting a real job or anything. It was actually sneaking out at night and, typically with your bare hands, killing one of these helot slaves and getting away with it, being able to return and say, hey, I killed this guy, to whoever, and not getting in trouble for it. Now, Athens, we've talked about the role of women in the typical Athenian model. They lacked rights. In Sparta, you're actually going to see the women serving a function. Most of the time, in a typical society, we see the family as the most important unit. Okay? Loyalty to the family, loyalty to parents, that sort of thing. In Sparta, your loyalty did not lie with your family. Your loyalty lied with Sparta, the state itself. That's what we get in these hardline military states. We see this even later on in history. As a result, the women actually had an important role in the society. Unlike much of Greece, they had rights, they had duties, they had training. Not on the level that males did, but still they had some rights. Defense of home and themselves while the husbands were fighting was okay. If they killed an intruder and that intruder was male, that was okay. They had rights in courts if it was self-defense. It's interesting to note there were two ways that a Spartan could get their name on a grave marker or a tombstone. Typically, they didn't. They were just unmarked graves. But getting your name on a grave marker was a proud distinction for a Spartan. If you were a male, the only way that you could get a grave marker was if you died heroically in defense of Sparta. You didn't retreat, you didn't back down, you stayed there, and you fought to the bitter end, killing as many of the enemy as you could before they killed you. Now, if you were a woman, you couldn't get a grave marker for dying in battle because you were a woman. You didn't serve in the military. The only way that a woman could get a grave marker like that was if they died in childbirth, because they died in service to Sparta. Childbirth was not seen as this lovely expression of a marriage in which two people are coming together, and this darling child was an expression of that love. No. Women dying in childbirth showed that they were willing to sacrifice themselves for the future defenders of Sparta. That's what a hardline military society looks like, and Sparta certainly was that. Now, let's take a look at Athens, and we're going to talk about each one of these tyrannical reformers later on, in part 2, I believe. Eventually, what you're going to see in Athens develop is a democracy through several forms of tyrants, and we've got 4 there, and we're going to take a look at all of them. Draco with draconian law, Solon, which ends debt slavery, Pisistratus, which redistributes the land away from much of the aristocracy to common farmers, and Cleisthenes, who sets up the Democratia, the democratic Athenian assembly. Also the idea of ostracism. Now you need to be able to define ostracism. So what's ostracism? If you've ever heard of somebody being ostracized from a community, this is where they get it from. It's where you are forbidden from being within the city limits. You're sort of banished to the outside for a period of time. And we're talking years here, where you were ostracized from Athens. It could be that you really just had to leave, or you were just causing too many problems or too many fights within the democratic process. if you were a military leader and you became unpopular for some reason, it was a way to punish you without throwing you in jail or killing you or some sort of terrible punishment. Now, the government side of Sparta is an oligarchy. An oligarchy, if you don't know what it means, make a note, means rule by few. A few people. It wasn't a monarchy, mono, rule by one. It was ruled by a select group. Now, in Spartan society, you had elected kings. There wasn't divine right where it passes down to the oldest male like we see in medieval Europe. These ephors, there were 2 of them that would serve at any given time, and they were elected. Once again, we're actually going to see this idea. Something similar will happen in the Roman Republic years and years later with the consuls of their military, but getting ahead of myself there. Sort of running the day-to-day operations, making the major decision with the Council of Elders. Now, these are people that are retired military. Now, to be allowed to retire from the Spartan military means that you had to survive to age 60. Then they let you retire. So imagine from the time you're 7, when your training begins, and you're in competition with your classmates, and you're supposed to go out in the middle of the night and kill a slave as a rite of passage. If you can survive the next 53 years, you get to live out your retirement as a Council of Elders. There were very few Council of Elders at any given time. This wasn't a large thousands and thousands of people. It was a select group of typically about 100 or so. And also remember, this is ancient times. Life expectancy was not, 76 years old either. To make it to 60, that was pretty good. Remember, the driving forces I've already mentioned here is not democracy. It is not the rights of all and debate. The driving force for Spartans was the success of the state. That they perpetuate it, that they expand it, that nobody ever takes Sparta. Now, and we're going to spend a lot of time on this in future classes, but I'm just previewing it right now. Cultural achievements, obviously democracy for Athens, modern philosophy, art, architecture, tragedy, and comedy, and they're going, these democratic ideals and a lot of this philosophy still read today and is going to heavily influence Western civilization. One of those early questions, which is the following city-states, had a greater impact on the development of Western civilization, is definitely Athens. However, as we'll see later on with the Persian Wars, it sort of needs Sparta to protect Greece from time to time as well. Cultural achievements, well, we don't have a lot of things that are written down from the Spartan perspective. Most of what we know about Sparta comes from outside sources, at least what's written down. We can look at the archaeology and we can see the ruins and these sorts of things. But much of what they say about Sparta is written by Athenians, particularly Herodotus, the father of history, who is an Athenian, and Thucydides, which is writing about the Peloponnesian conflict, which we'll discuss later on, which is basically a war between an alliance led by Athens and an alliance led by Sparta. He's talking about the enemy. So we know very little about Sparta from their perspective. Very quickly, and hopefully you have an idea of where these guys are already, Athens to the north and Sparta on the Peloponnesus. Remember, Sparta is going to be more of a land-based territory with more agriculture by this large Helot population, whereas Athens is going to be spreading out, colonizing throughout much of the Mediterranean, and the Aegean, of course. And that is where we will pick it up with part 2. So go to part 2 of this series, and we will discuss it from there.